I love Nintendo. It was the first company that sparked my interest with video games with the classic game Super Mario Bros. I spent many hours playing on different consoles like the SNES, Nintendo 64, and the GameCube, yet somehow I never really got into the Legend of Zelda games. I know this is an amazing series beloved by many people, but honestly, I was not and I'm still not too familiar with it, but when I was 8 years old, I played A Link to the Past on the SNES, and I remember I loved it. This was my first ever experience with the Legend of Zelda games, and I remember I spent countless hours searching Hyrule for cool items. Unfortunately, I would not play any other Zelda games because I started getting into PlayStation games. Many years would go by until Breath of the Wild came out in 2017 that my curiosity would again be interested in playing a new Zelda game, especially when one of my favorite streamers, Nina Lee, played it on Twitch. Watching Neen's play Breath of the Wild was fun, especially with the situation she would find herself in. This convinced me to buy a Switch so I could play Breath of the Wild myself and stream it on my Twitch channel at the time, but I decided it was not the right moment yet since I did not have a PC or a capture card at the time. So I held off on it and put it in my backlog. Well, several years would pass by and I would not get to play Breath of the Wild until earlier this year on my channel. Man, did this game blow my mind and open a new world of possibilities for me. 20 years later, I would finally get to experience my second Zelda game ever, and it was awesome. Exploring Hyrule, fighting enemies, and even learning how to cook in the game was fun. If you have not experienced Breath of the Wild, I highly recommend it. I really like how you did not need to have played any of the other previous Zelda games to get into this game, since it was relatively self-contained, which was cool since I hadn't touched the Zelda game since A Link to the Past. Breath of the Wild is the first ever open world Zelda game where you're free to do whatever you want and go wherever you want. This was good news for me because I love open world games, and if you've seen my channel, you know I've covered many open world games here. Now, I did die a lot, especially since I was playing with Joy-Cons, and my Joy-Cons had drift, which made for many unique experiences where I died a lot, and I mean a lot of times. Getting to explore Hyrule, many civilians taking on side quests, and overall taking in the view of this game was one of the best games I've ever experienced, and I'm glad that many of you decided to join me in these magical adventures on stream. Things were chaotic, and I know some of my viewers who are pro Zelda experts cringed in the way I did some things, but overall, I think it was fun to learn by failing spectacularly. I still have nightmares whenever I see Guardians, especially since their theme was so memorable and it gave you PTSD. Exploring Hyrule with their trusty paraglider was so cool, and it came in handy with reaching hard places. Climbing mountains was very cool, but it could be very stressful, especially when your stamina wheel ran out, which may or may not have caused certain deaths of mine. Collecting items was cool, but I think one of the best features in this game is that the weapons are breakable. The fact that I had to have a collection of weapons at my disposal really made it challenging in combat because it made me think about strategy and which weapons I should use against certain enemies. Usually in other games I'll stick to a few weapons that I like, but Breath of the Wild completely changed that for me with breakable weapons. It could be a wild card sometimes, but it made me adapt to all sorts of different enemies. I really like using bows a lot in combat, especially since I could bop enemies back and stun them, making them easier to deal with. Now, many of you know I hate puzzles because usually I'm not very good with them. I often call both puzzles and fighting games my kryptonite because I just suck at them. Lo and behold, Breath of the Wild would have hundreds of puzzles for me to solve, and some of them would be so challenging that I had to look them up, but there were a few I got on my own, which made me feel smart, and it was an achievement in my book. I did not like the motion control puzzles because one wrong move and the puzzle would go crazy, and you'd have to start over or be lucky enough to somehow solve it. I really liked the combat in this game for the most part. It was easy to learn most of the moves, but there were some times where I would forget the combat and get hurt a lot. For the most part, I would say I got the hang of it. The story for Breath of the Wild is cool, but it has also had its dark moments, especially finding out the fates of the champions of Hyrule and how much of a threat Calamity Ganon truly was. The story also introduced us to many new characters. One of my favorites will always be Prince Sidon, who's Link's best friend. His charisma and his charm really lightened the load of the story, and while he did not play a big role in Breath of the Wild, he would play a big role in Tears of the Kingdom. Having fun interactions with characters and giving them voices was a lot of fun. Overall, I would say Breath of the Wild is one of the games I needed to play, and despite so many delays, when I got a chance to really sit down and enjoy the game, it was a one-of-a-kind experience. I really enjoyed cooking in Breath of the Wild because I would mix so many things to make all sorts of different foods. I always made a joke by saying that I was Gordon Ramsay, even though my cooking in real life was not as good as it was in the game. If I had to honestly rate Breath of the Wild, I would say it's a 9.5 out of 10. Breath of the Wild was a completely new take for me, and while I have played many open world games in the past, none of them compared to this one. The exploration, music, story, combat, graphics, and absolute beauty, you could truly get lost for hours in the game, yet there would still be so much more to do. Now, how do you live up to the hype and create a sequel to Breath of the Wild? The truth is you let the Zelda team cook, and oh boy did they cook. I'm usually very picky with sequels because of whether it's video games, TV shows, or movies, they rarely live up to the hype of their predecessor. This was not the case for Nintendo. I was still in the middle of my playthrough when we got to see trailers for Tears of the Kingdom. Those trailers not only got you hyped, but you could see the precision, beauty, and love love that was poured into this game. While I did not get to play Tears of the Kingdom on day 1, since I was still playing Breath of the Wild on stream, I did get to watch Nish and Doza play it on their channel. Nish and Doza live streams are legendary, and I would highly recommend you to subscribe to them because they inspired me to come to YouTube. The way they were playing Tears of the Kingdom got me hyped to eventually play it on my channel. They even broke the game mechanics in some cool ways. When I finally beat Breath of the Wild and started playing Tears of the Kingdom, oh my goodness was it a change. It's like Nintendo took everything great about Breath of the Wild and multiplied it. It truly was amazing to see, and experience it was even better since I was playing these games back to back. Tears of the Kingdom added many new mechanics. The biggest one was crafting. People built all sorts of crazy builds from torture chambers, Batmobiles, and Megazords. I really like the fact that we could combine objects with weapons to make them stronger or more versatile. Hyrule now was even bigger than it was before in Breath of the Wild, with 2 new areas to explore, the Sky Islands and the Depths. These new areas added a lot of new weapons and new materials that we could use in our adventures. I personally really liked exploring the depths, and while it was pitch black at first, finding all sorts of creepy enemies to fight and cool gear was worth it. The depths were very hard to explore since there was gloom everywhere, even on enemies, which made it hard to heal after taking damage. There were many cool enemies to fight, especially the Lino Coliseum in the depths. The enemies were much harder and smarter in Tears of the Kingdom than they were in Breath of the Wild. Nintendo, the Zelda team, introduced a lot of new enemies in this game, which I really like to fight: the Flux Constructs, Gibdos, and Gleeloks, just to name a few. Exploring the Sky Islands was also very cool, with so many unique areas to explore. One aspect I think Tears of the Kingdom did better than Breath of the Wild was the shrines. Now, I like doing the shrines. I got all of them in Breath of the Wild, but some of them were very challenging. Thankfully, Tears of the Kingdom shrines weren't that challenging. You had to use a lot more common sense than breaking your head trying to solve these shrines like you did in Breath of the Wild. One of the things I absolutely loved about Tears of the Kingdom was the new abilities that we would get. Link had new powers thanks to King Raru's arm. My favorite abilities were Ascend and Recall. I used them a lot during my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom since they were lifesavers and essential in helping us traverse Hyrule. The story for Tears of the Kingdom was brilliant and expanded a lot of lore on the early days of Hyrule. We got to meet new characters like King Raru, Queen Sonia, and the ultimate menace Ganondorf. Now, Ganondorf was so evil and despicable in this game, especially when he had the creepiest smile ever. I still have nightmares about it. Ganondorf came so close to conquering Hyrule in the past, but the way King Raru and the sages fought back against Ganondorf was so epic and legendary. King Raru was so badass, especially during his last stand during the Prisoning War. Pila, one of my members and friends of the community, said that King Raru was the first time she had a crush on a furry, and honestly it's not hard to see why. Now it was Link's turn to face Ganondorf in the present, and man was it terrifying. You could feel the sense of dread from the start of the game to the end of the game. I really love how they made Zelda a very important character, and her role would be one full of hardships, but ultimately it would give Link the edge he needed to be Ganondorf alongside his allies. The exploration in Tears of the Kingdom was peak, and it was somehow better than Breath of the Wild. I really liked doing the temples, mazes, and shrines. Now, while I never really got into Korok hunting like other people did in Tears of the Kingdom, I was a lot more empathetic towards them because many of them had to flee Korok Forest due to Ganondorf's influence in Hyrule. Now, I personally helped as many Koroks as I could whenever I would find these little guys on my adventures throughout Hyrule. Many people on the internet were not so kind to them, with people making videos about torturing them, which was surprising to see. Something that I really liked and appreciated was how Ganondorf really affected Hyrule with all the monsters he created and the gloom that spread throughout the land. For example, Rito Village, which usually has very good weather, has become a frozen wasteland which deeply affected the Rito people, with many of them being cold and starving. It's up to Link to explore different areas to see what is causing these strange phenomena across Hyrule. One enemy that will forever haunt me to the core is the Gloom Hands. The sense of dread I felt whenever I stumbled across them was horrifying, and if they grabbed you, it was almost a guaranteed game over. I never expected Tears of the Kingdom would add horror aspects, but they did, and somehow it really worked for this game. One enemy boss I really liked fighting was Master Koga and the Yiga clan in Tears of the Kingdom. While Master Koga and the Yiga clan did not have huge roles in Breath of the Wild, in Tears of the Kingdom they did, especially if you go exploring in the depths. This was one boss fight I highly enjoyed beating since the interactions with Master Koga and the Yiga clan were always hilarious. Overall, I would say Tears of the Kingdom is one of the best sequel games I've ever played. If I had to rate Tears of the Kingdom honestly, I would give it a 9.8 out of 10. I really enjoy the story, music, exploration, bosses, and combat. Getting to play both the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom back to back was truly a one-of-a-kind experience. One thing that I found to be a bit embarrassing for both games was I learned how to parry with my shields very well, but I didn't learn how to flurry rush until I faced Ganondorf at the end of Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are wonderful masterpieces that should be experienced by more people, and if you haven't played it for yourself, I highly recommend it. There were many moments of anger, frustrations, deaths, laughter, accidents, sadness, and awe. Now I really want to try other Zelda games I have not experienced yet, like Ocarina of Time, Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, and so many more. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I would really love to hear your thoughts about the Zelda games. As always, if you want to help support the channel further and get access to cool behind the scenes content, you can always become a member by hitting the join button. Thanks for watching, and may the Triforce be with you.